can see there's some QR codes there if you're interested at all in looking into me. I post a lot in LinkedIn. I also am a Forbes columnist, so I publish 2 columns a month about the intersection between HR, finance, and corporate governance. So that's my domain space. And there's a QR code for the book, and I brought 1 copy with me, so if somebody wants it, come and see me. So today what I want to do is talk to you about 3 topics related to AI in HR and the importance of keeping humans in the loop and how to do that. So I'm going to be talking about the strategic imperatives, or the strategic initiatives around it. I'm going to talk to you about governance and policy and ethics. And I think the thing maybe that you'll find most interesting is I'm going to give you a real-life example of how to think about jobs and the impact of AI on jobs. So how many people in the room are HR people? 1? We have 1 lonely person in the room? Okay, I'll speak to you then. So that's good. So as practitioners, not in HR, but practitioners in your specific areas, do you know what your organization's strategy or policy is about AI and about things that humans are supposed to do versus things that humans can augment using AI or generative AI? So, show of hands, who knows about their corporate policy? Wow, I'm surprised. That's really good. Here's another question. How many of you are using AI, which I would imagine, since this is a tech conference, how many are using generative AI? Yeah, more people. Okay, so we're going to focus our conversation on generative AI because that is the great democratizer. That's something that every individual, maybe even every employee, if your company is not blocking access to outside generative AI or using an internal generative AI. So how many times a day are you using generative AI in your, again, not AI, generative AI in your work? So show of hands for more than 10 times a day. Between 5 and 10 times a day. Anybody more than 10 times a day? Yeah, a few of you. So I use it all day long. All day long I'm using it. How has it changed the way that you work? So you can just shout out, like, anyone? More? More effective and efficient. So it's a time saver, right? Anyone else? Now you have to make more stuff. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But that's one of the consequences. So I use it to generate first drafts. It's much easier to respond to something than it is to create it from whole cloth. And, you know, I use lots of different generative AI programs for different things. So with one hat, I'm a practitioner. With another hat, I'm an academic. So I have different domain spaces. And I give it very specific and intricate prompts that create first draft versions. And then I go and edit the hell out of it. I often ask generative AI to ask me questions. So what do you need? Do you need more information from me? Or what kind of information do you need from me so that you can create a response? So I actually get Gen AI to ask me for prompt information, which is sort of an interesting thing. And I have a very nice, sympathetic relationship with my ChatGPT. So you're using it for yourself. How many of you are actually managing people? And how has it impacted the way that you manage your staff? So how many of you, because we heard this morning that Gen AI is good for helping people write reports. So how many of you are actually using Gen AI to write reports? Right. Now, how many of you are using Gen AI to summarize the reports that you're getting from others? Yeah, so is that like kind of goofy? So we're having Gen AI write things based on our prompts, right? are bullet points. It writes a report, then we take that report and we ask Gen AI to write bullet points. So, like, how human is that? I think that's really human. Okay, so let's talk about the role of AI in strategy. AI has become a critical strategic necessity for organizations in modern business, particularly within the HR function. Now, why do you think the HR function is so different than other functions? Because HR's job is actually to support humans, right? As you're doing work in other areas. So, is there a function in the organization? Maybe somebody can come up with something creative, because I haven't been able to think of one, where the function does not require a human in it. So some of you might think, oh, robotics and manufacturing. You build an algorithm, you put in the data, it spits out something, but then a human has to be involved. One, to put in the data. Two, to interpret the data that's the algorithm output. And three, to communicate with the customer. So the implementation of AI comes with associated risks, such as biases in the algorithms, ethical concerns, and data privacy issues. And that's why we need a strategic imperative, because we need to understand what we're actually trying to accomplish in the organization with allowing our employees to use generative AI and allowing HR to build generative AI or AI into HR processes. So one of the things that we've seen the rise of recently, well, not recently, over the last maybe like 5 years, is the digital workforce, right? So we have bots on our websites, either internal or external websites, that allow employees to query and get an answer without a human being involved. So that's about the only place where we don't have humans in the loop, is in the digital work area. And yet we still need humans to program the digital workforce. And we still need humans to respond when the employee says, I want to speak to a human. So how many of you have used like digital work, digital workers, like when you call into a helpline and you push the buttons, right? Or you speak what you need. And then at a certain point, I'm going to say almost all of you, if you can't get your question answered, you hit 0. I need to speak to a human at this point. Now, we've gotten trained, right? So how many of you bypass the whole process and just hit the 0? Yeah. So we need to think about how to really leverage the digital workforce and how to build the digital workforce so that it helps our productivity. So AI can drastically enhance HR and HR initiatives by automating repetitive tasks. So we heard that this morning from Chris when he was talking about how they put in the schemas and the AI actually looks and figures out what's right and what's wrong. And those kinds of repetitive tasks are not what humans want to do, right? So we can integrate the use of AI in HR either at the job level or at the function level by helping humans become more efficient and enhance their job satisfaction, because now they're doing work that actually stimulates them and has more cognitive content to it. AI can also enhance decision-making, which you know because it helps reason, it helps bring together large amounts of data and find trends, and highlight information that we need to be able to make better decisions. I just want to point out that this is not a new thought, that there are competitors in this space, there are organizations in this space that have already thought about it, that are already doing it: Boeing, GE Aerospace, Airbus, Northrop Grumman, and IBM. And the quote at the bottom, so I'm a big fan of a guy named Gad Levinon, who is an economist. He used to be the chief economist at the Conference Board. Now he's the chief economist at Burning Glass. And Gad, I worked at the Conference Board, and Gad is a really great guy, and he has a LinkedIn, column, if you can call it that. And I I highly recommend that you follow him. He's super. So I don't know if you're going to get a copy of these slides, but I put in hot links into the presentation, so you can just look it up. I have information about all of these organizations and in terms of the way that they use HR, AI and HR strategy, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time, but I just want to highlight a couple of things. So GE Aerospace has this thing called Wingmate that all 52,000 employees use. And it summarizes manuals, it addresses quality issues, it does draft communications, blah, blah, blah. Boeing has something that they use for their careers, for helping employees manage their careers. Airbus has something to ensure ethical standards are met and risks are mitigated, on and on. So the long and the short of it is that artificial intelligence is transforming productivity by going beyond task automation and driving innovation, right? When you have more time to do your job, you have more time to think. And that's what professionals like to do. They like to think. I have here in my notes, generative AI, for example, supports the development of cutting-edge solutions like predictive analytics tools. How can we use predictive analytics in HR? How can we use predictive analytics in our jobs? So in our jobs, it's kind of clear, right? For HR, what are the kinds of things that organizations want to be able to predict from an HR perspective? Anyone?
Skills gaps.
Skills gaps. What else?
The next generation workforce.
Next generation workforce.
Departure risk.
Very good. Attrition.
When employees are being underpaid?
They're always underpaid. No. That's a good one. So look at competitiveness.
Benefits for employees, how they change over time?
Benefits, the types of benefits that you should be offering. So, I'm a baby boomer. If you ask me what kind of a benefit I'd want, I'd say give me the whole value in retirement, right? But the alphas and the millennials don't think that way, right? They want purpose, they want time off, they want work-life balance. So how can we actually deliver value, perceived value, to different parts of our employee workforce? That's one of the things that Stella and I, my co-author, and I tackle in the book. One of the things that you also talked about was, somebody said, productivity. So we talked about the strategic imperative, which is really about making employees more efficient, creating the types of jobs where employees are excited about work, are creative, are innovative, because they have the time to think. We laden our jobs with a lot of administrative, task-related activities that most professionals, they don't find that very interesting. So there's a strategic imperative. But there's also a governance and policy imperative. And that's making sure that we employ and we integrate AI ethically into our jobs. And we already know that Gen AI has a bias in it. So, don't think that, this is a panacea. We really need to think about it. In fact, New York State is the first, and I think the only state right now, that requires organizations that use AI or generative AI in recruiting and candidate selection to actually prove that their Gen AI or their AI is not biased. So the state puts the onus on the company to ensure that there's no bias in the way that they're selecting and recruiting people. So as AI becomes a strategic tool for HR, governance frameworks must be proactive, ensuring that AI is deployed ethically and transparently to maintain trust and safeguard the organization's reputation. Because really, in the end, that's all we have, right? We need to think about data privacy, and we need to think about risk mitigation. I have been a CHRO since 20, and I always thought of HR as a risk mitigation function, first and foremost. And it's a schizophrenic function because the organization has to protect the employees from anything that's outside of the company. But the organization has to protect itself from its employees. So it's kind of schizophrenic. It's also schizophrenic because it has to be the mother and the policeman. So you have to be tough love, but you also have to be empathetic with your employees. So how do you mitigate risk when you've got something that people are using sort of unsupervised? And that's where you as managers and supervisors really come in. So I thought maybe it would be good to give you a little bit of a context for how to think about incorporating AI into HR. You need to think about how to integrate AI into the work that you're doing or into how you're deploying it for your teams. And the first thing is, what is the business problem you're trying to solve? So Dave Ulrich, who's like the grandfather of modern HR, says we don't do HR for HR's sake. We do HR for the benefit of the customer and to support the organization. So HR professionals that are busy measuring what percent of the organization goes through performance management or what percent of the organization gets training and development, they're asking the wrong questions. Those are the wrong KPIs. The right KPI is, how is our employee performance supporting customer satisfaction, repeat business, and supporting profitable outcomes for the company? So in my work at Columbia, that's one of the things that I'm trying to reframe my students to think about, is don't count noses, don't count activity, count impact, count results. So what is the business problem we're trying to solve? And is the problem big enough? Don't go chasing squirrels, hunt elephants, right? And you've got a great tool to be able to hunt elephants now. Technology is emerging all the time. So how can we stay current on that? So can this solve future business problems as well as current business problems? How can we collaborate with the function leaders and integrate human capital as a support to them achieving their strategy? And I talked a little bit before about the different generations in the workplace. They all have different needs and different ideas. So how do we create an employee-centric approach, right? In the old days, which is also continuing today, we usually have one HR policy for all the employees, right? One type of performance management, one strategic workforce planning policy, one time off policy, one set of benefits. But we've got 5 generations in the workforce. So the day of standardization is, I think, over. And what we need to think about is, how do we customize? And because we can use generative AI, we can augment our staff to be able to carry the load of that, because the argument is, we don't have enough people. It's too labor intensive. But if we can augment our workforce, especially in HR, with these kinds of tools, we can create as many policies as we want. And then we can ask generative AI to make sure that the policies are consistent and fair, so we can have it do the work for us. And then the last thing is continuous learning and development, right? The organization's needs change really quickly, and we need to be able to manage our employees the same way, with agility. Where have we seen AI and HR show up? A lot around recruiting, a lot around learning and development, a lot around performance management and coaching, and then a lot around succession planning. So, how many of you have used tools to manage your people in any of these categories? Yeah, and how are you finding those programs and those tools? Are they intuitive? Are they supportive for the most part? Yeah, good? Okay, then your HR people are doing a good job if they're delivering to you tools that you actually find useful. Most organizations, most people don't experience HR programs that way. They find them clunky, they find them not so user-friendly, they find them rules-bound. And one of the things that we want to think about is how can we integrate AI into these employee processes? And I've only listed 4 here, but you can imagine that there are a lot more than 4. To make the processes more intuitive, more insightful, right? When you do performance reviews on every one of your employees, wouldn't it be great if you had a tool that actually allowed you to compare and contrast the competencies of all of your employees? So you don't have to flip back and forth between forms. You can see it as a dashboard. Those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about in the human resources area to help. These are the kinds of things that you can use AI for in recruiting, learning and development, performance management. Again, I'm using some conference board research. They recently did a C-suite or a CEO survey that was just completed in 2025, just earlier this month, because we're still in January. And we asked CEOs what they think and what areas of your business do you see the biggest improvement as a result of the application of artificial intelligence? And what did they say? The majority of them said, well, not the majority of all CEOs, but the majority of the answer was around productivity of the workforce. So CEOs are really seeing how AI is boosting worker productivity. So there was a study, I don't think it's published yet, that's it's going to be published by World at Work. And I know about this because I'm on their editorial board. What don't I do? And the study, the research says that since 1979, productivity at the per employee, so productivity overall employees, has improved 81%. So that's 45 years. We've seen an 81% improvement in average employee productivity. Does that surprise you? That people are almost doing twice as much work today than they were doing 45 years ago? Yeah, it sort of makes sense. Would it shock you to know that real wage gains were at 29%? So we're asking employees to do almost twice as much work, and we're only paying them a third more. And we haven't seen productivity improvement yet because AI is really going to boost, and Gen AI is going to boost productivity. So, you know, you guys said that already at the beginning, that what you thought the impact was going to be is boosting worker productivity. So that's what we're seeing. So let's just talk through, what does that look like? What do HR people, what do you as leaders, as team leaders, need to be thinking about when we think about boosting productivity? And what I wanted to do is pick a job. So I picked this non-destructive testing specialist, which is pretty rampant in the aerospace industry, and happens to be a job that I analyzed for a litigation support project that I did several years ago. So I really understand this job. In summary, it evaluates the safety and integrity of materials and structures using advanced testing techniques like ultrasonic, radiographic, blah, blah, blah. And here are the key accountabilities. So there's 10 key accountabilities for this job. What I did is I asked Gen AI to tell me how this job could be augmented. Now, I asked Gen AI, but I'm an HR person. So I took what it told me and used my judgment as a human in the loop to actually tweak these numbers. So here are the 10 accountabilities. And we know the percent of the position of the total work that each one of those accountabilities represents. And then I said, how can we augment that task using generative AI? And I gave you how it could be augmented, how many hours it is saving based on the augmentation. So 30% of the job, or 650 hours a year, can be freed up not by redesigning the job, by allowing the employee to augment his work with AI or Gen AI. And then I identified what some of the risks are, because remember, HR is risk management. So we want to make sure that when we redesign jobs, we're actually mindful of the risk that may be inherent in redesigning that job. So let me ask you a question. This job now has 30% more of his time. You as a supervisor, what would you ask that person to do? He's got 650 hours a year that he's freed up. What do you do? Do you let him think for 650 hours? Do you assign him a new project? Do you give him more work to do? And the same nature of work. So how would you manage that? Anyone? So let's personalize it. If your job got redesigned, how would you like to be able to spend those extra 650 hours a year? Or think of it this way, it's a third of your day, right? 9 to 1, 9 to 1:30, you work on your job. 1:30 to 5, what do? What do most employees want in their jobs? Okay, more time off with the same pay, but the millennials and the Gen Alphas, they actually want more training. They want to learn. They want the opportunity to be able to advance in their careers. So couldn't you take a couple of those hours and actually dedicate that to learning? So learning how to use Gen AI, learning how to do another job, because that non-destructive tester probably has a job above it, right? Has a superior job, and people want to be able to become masterful in their jobs and have opportunities for advancement. Approximately 34% of this person's job task, or about 30%, can be augmented by digital support. Think about, in totality in the United States, what kind of an economic impact do you think that's going to have? Like huge, right? So there's some projections that say that we have not even begun to scratch the surface of the productivity improvements that we're going to experience in Gen AI, or AI, augmenting our workforce. And not only that, we can't even imagine the types of jobs that we're going to see in the future. Like, we can't even begin to imagine the kinds of jobs. I had lunch with somebody who's got a kid that's in high school. The job that kid is going to do in the future has not even been invented. And I think that's really exciting. Automating work is going to have an impact on the labor market, on economic distribution, on innovation and growth. And we need to do a lot more research to really understand how to harness the power that we're going to see. So here's a quote that I like. Automating remote work can have profound economic consequences, potentially doubling or multiplying GDP by a factor of 10 or more. This transformative shift underscores the need for strategic workforce planning to harness the benefits while addressing employee and societal challenges. So we're really at the cutting edge. And this is why I find HR is such an exciting function these days. I know it sounds really boring, but if you think that 86% of our GDP is driven by services, and we cannot deliver services without people, our economy depends on how well companies can manage, retain, inspire the workforce. So one of the things that I also wanted to show you about is how do we link human capital to financial performance? So everybody always thinks of HR sort of off to the side as an administrative function, but actually, most organizations spend more than 50% of their operating expense on people and think about it as a sunk cost. But people are actually the engine of economic value creation for your organizations, especially the high cognitive content organizations. So if we think about this causal model, human capital drives business operations, which drives customers and customer satisfaction, which ultimately drive financial performance, revenues, profits, market value. So I want to make you aware of a couple of, well, actually, my favorite ETS that's run by Harbor Capital, and this is, I have nothing to do with the company, but I've been looking at investment funds that think about human capital as a driver of value creation. So there are a few of them. There's Lori Bassey's, there's Hip Investor, there are a few of them. There's an S&P index in Japan that looks at human capital as a driver of value creation. But the one that I like the best is run by Harbor Capital, and it's based on something called the Human Capital Factor Index, which is created by this company called Irrational Capital. So have any of you seen a show on TV called Irrational? Yeah, so that's Dan Ariely, who's the behavioralist. He's a co-founder of this company. So they actually look at intrinsic signals around HR to predict financial performance. This ETF is built, has 150 companies in it. It's built based on the Human Capital Factor Index, and last year it returned a 30%, where its competitor funds returned 18%. So you think there's something magical about understanding human capital as a driver of economic value creation? I hope so, because I'm invested in the fund. I have nothing to do with the company, but I did invest in the fund. So how do you create a business case? So let's say you're a manager and you want to ask HR to help you redesign the jobs that report into you. You're going to go to HR, and HR is going to say, oh, no, that's too big of a job. We don't want to do that. So you're going to go to your line supervisor, and you're going to say, I think that we can get a lot more out of our staff in terms of productivity and impact if we redesign their jobs, if we rethink how to leverage generative AI or AI in the way that we do work. So you have to create a business strategy. You have to create a business case. So you have to identify the business problem, not the HR problem, the business problem. Because if you're going to say, oh, we have too much turnover, they're not going to say anything. But if you say, it costs us too much money, it costs us too much of our budget to replace people all the time, that's a business case. Then you need to figure out how to measure that. So the mother of all HR efficiency indicators is something called HCROI, Human Capital Return on Investment. If you're in a P&L, if you have your own P&L, you can measure HCROI for your P&L. HCROI is calculated by taking revenues minus expense, adjusted for the cost of human capital. So whatever your salaries are for your team, minus the load for benefits, right? Or whatever they're charging you for training and development, that's the numerator. So it's revenue minus expense minus total cost of workforce for your group, divided by total cost of workforce. That's a pure ROI number. Any business person will say, I know nothing about how good your human capital programs are, but I can see what the outcome is in this number. Anything over 1 means that you're getting a positive return on that investment in people, right? Because we've got the investment in people as the denominator, and the numerator is an adjusted profitability that takes out the cost of those people. So if it's greater than 1, the dollar that you've invested in people is generating more than $1 in adjusted profit. The higher that number, the better you're getting your return on investment in your people. And our research shows that a 5% improvement in HCROI, if you're spending more than 50% of your operating costs on people, can lift your profitability anywhere between 17 and 30%. Can you imagine going to your business head and saying, I can drop another 15, 20, 30% to the bottom line just by managing my people better? That's a good business case. So use HCROI or use productivity. There are about 12 to 15 of these macroeconomic human capital indicators that take out all the subjectivity of how good or bad your programs are performing or designed and get to the results. Then you need to do a utility analysis, understand the cost and the benefit. So you don't want to invest more in the intervention than the benefit you're going to get from it. Align leadership initiative to a financial outcome. So it's pretty compelling to go to your boss and say, I think we can drop another 15% profit to our division. That's pretty compelling. Then you have to prove how you can do that. Identify the risks and any mitigation strategies that you're thinking about. Usually, I don't go to a CFO with absolute numbers, especially around HR initiatives. I usually go with a range of values, right? So I said someplace between 17 and 25%. Because if you go to your CFO with a solid number, first, you got to deliver on that solid number. And second, the CFO has no way of understanding the context of the impact around sensitivity of the performance of the initiative. So if you go with a range, it makes more sense for a CFO or a decision maker. And it feels, especially for HR, a little less kindergartenish, right? Naive that we're going to hit this number. You're going to hit a number in a range, within a range. So, and then somebody was talking this morning about storytelling. So HR people are usually good at storytelling. They're not good at using data to support their stories. And line people are really good at creating the numbers, but not necessarily so good at creating the story. So you have to go with a compelling business case to the stakeholder, whoever the stakeholder is. The reason that I call it a compelling story is because storytelling is really interesting. But what we want is our stories to drive action in others. So that's why I refer to it as a compelling story, a compelling narrative. Because what you want is for the listener to say, oh my God, what do I need to do that, right? It wants for action. So make sure that your stories are compelling. Last point, make sure you use visuals and dashboards. Engineers are really good at that. HR people are not so good at that. So integrate visuals or dashboards into your story. Okay, so what I thought I'd give you is a couple of tools. So there's a QR code for that. You can actually get this from our HC Moneyball website. And this is an HCROI calculator. So for this calculator, all you need is revenues, expense, estimated EBITDA, and then the employee cost as a percent of your total expense. And the calculator will calculate HCROI for you instantly. And then it'll also tell you, so this is actually a real live example of a client. Their current EBITDA is $500 million. Their HCROI is $2.11. A 5% increase drives it to $2.22, and it would improve their EBITDA by 20%. So the head of human resources was delighted. Changed the way the conversation happened with her executive management team. So we've now identified the opportunity. The question is, how do I drive HCROI up by 5%? And that's where you need either good internal resources, a good consultant, and more data analytics to identify which program of the HR programs can actually help you drive that improved performance. Also, cost of attrition is really deadly for organizations. So CFOs like to think about, oh, if I have natural attrition, that's a good thing, right? Because I'm saving on my salary and my benefits cost. But what you're also losing is the contribution that that person makes to revenue, to productivity. So I did a project recently for an insurance company where they pay their people on average $85,000 a year, and the average productivity of their employee workforce is $275,000 of contribution per employee. Now, that's sort of a generalization because you've got salespeople that are making a lot bigger contribution to revenue, but in this organization, which is service-oriented, it's B2C, every employee basically has a customer. That customer is either internal or external, but they're a service provider. So I was working with the CFO, and what I said was, this is your productivity. Your average productivity is $275,000 per person. Your average pay is $85,000. The ratio from pay to performance to productivity is 2.8. So for every dollar you're paying the employee, they're generating $2.8 in revenue. And the CFO sort of cocks his head a little bit, and I said, don't go there. And he said, what? And I said, you're thinking about how you can cut heads to get more productivity out of people, because the formula is revenue divided by head count. So if you cut heads, you get more productivity. I said, but you should be asking how many people at $85,000 a year can I hire? How fast can I hire those people to generate $275,000? And the interesting thing is, it's not a straight line relationship, it's curvilinear, because at a certain point, you get diminishing returns on every additional employee, right? So he thought for a minute, and he said, yeah. And he said, what's that point? And I said, now you gotta hire me to figure that one out for you. Because I didn't know, I have to run sensitivity analysis. But reframing, if you think of your employees instead of sunk cost as a driver of economic value creation, all of a sudden, it's a whole new world, and it's a whole new way to measure the effectiveness of people. So there's a QR code, which you can access. It'll take you right to the calculator. I do not keep any information that you enter into that calculator. I use it as a lead magnet. I want to add you to my mailing list. I want to put you on my monthly newsletter. So feel free to use the calculator knowing that we do not keep any information behind it. So you can use it as many times as you want. You can put in fake data, you can put in real data. I don't see any of the data behind it. All I see is on the landing page where you put in your name, your email address, and your company. So feel free to use it. It's there for you as a gift from me. Okay. The key takeaways. So human capital is a critical intangible asset. So what I didn't tell you about is the SEC in 2020 reclassified human capital not as an expense, but as an investment in an intangible asset. It's not me saying it's an intangible asset, it's the SEC saying it. So we need to shift our thinking. In Europe, they're way ahead of us in terms of understanding human capital and materiality. Materiality means, does it move the needle? Does it change the way an investor would think about a potential investment if they knew something about human capital? And that's what the SEC is saying. They're actually requiring companies that deem human capital material to disclose on their financial statements. So it's a critical intangible asset. It's not a sunk cost. The more and the better you invest in humans, the better your financial outcomes are going to be. Ignoring human capital can lead to significant management decision-making errors, right? And I'm sure many of you have experienced this where you just were blindsided by something. You made a decision, your team, your employees just didn't buy it, and you paid the price for it. There are multiple approaches and metrics to inform management decision-making. I talked to you about HCROI, Human Capital Return on Investment, but there's HCVA, Human Capital Value Add, HEVA, Human Economic Value Add, HCMV, Human Capital Market Value, and Productivity, which I defined. If you go on Google, you can find the algorithms for all of these. If you get the book, you can get all the algorithms. And not only that, you can figure out how to use them in your business case. What we found is organizations that use data analytics to transform human capital performance into financial indicators, these metrics, pay attention to them, right? And what do we know about what we pay attention to? Anyone? Bueller? Bueller? What happens when you pay attention to something? It improves, right? So what we found in our research, we studied about 600 companies, and what we found is that organizations that have dedicated human capital analytics departments in their HR function had 3 times higher HCROI than companies that don't do analytics, that don't pay attention to this, that run HR like a qualitative function instead of a quantitative one. So using data analytics generates the insights for better decision-making. Understanding the impact on revenue and expense is crucial. And if you're spending more than 50% of your operating expense on people, it's highly leverageable. Small improvements in a big expense generate big impact on profit. So think about that. And then creating a business case approach to human capital is critical, where you can show the return on investment in human capital. And for HR people, it makes or breaks our ask. Because HR usually goes to CFO and CEO like Oliver, right? Know what I'm talking about? More, sir, may I have more? So we don't want to do that. We want to get our budgets funded by using the same discipline that every other function in the organization uses, data analytics and evidence-based approaches, right, to show the ROI. Please connect with me on LinkedIn. I love followers, and I love actually seeing your feeds in my stream so I can see you guys and what you're thinking and doing and when you change jobs. So, questions, comments?
How would this relate in the government sector? Because you don't have, ROI or, those sorts of, cells, or you get a budget.
Right.
It's different.
It is different because you have set budgets, and if you're a nonprofit or a not-for-profit, you want to use up all of your budget. What I would say to you is, even though your budgets are fixed, and for most organizations, you can actually reallocate your excess funds to different programs. So if you can reduce attrition, you've freed up a whole bunch of resources that then you can use to support other HR initiatives in the organization. So it benefits you, it benefits the employees if you can actually be more effective and efficient in the way that you're running HR, instead of either running at a deficit or, using all your budget and not getting. And you can use HCROI internally. You don't even need to report it if you don't want to. It's an internal tool that you can use.
I really appreciated your comment about redesigning jobs and identifying specifically where you can get the return on an investment with generative AI. The comments that we had were kind of interesting about, well, what should you do with that free time? Besides the accounting issues I got as a government contractor, we'll figure that out.
Yeah.
But you said more work. Well, that doesn't benefit the employee.
No.
More time off doesn't benefit the employer. But process improvement, yeah, probably both.
Learning and development.
Product improvement, definitely in customers like that, right? And then professional development, right?
Yep.
So those were some of the ones I thought about. In an organization though with a fixed rate structure, I get paid by billable hours.
Right.
I have seen the argument of, why would I want to be more efficient when I can charge the government more? So have you run into that or solved that dilemma that government contractors have?
Value billing. Yeah, it's a quandary.
Yeah.
Because you have to balance overworking your employees with a financial goal. So you know, I don't even know how to answer that.
Yeah. No,
Except to say, if you deliver value to your employees, perceived value, they're more efficient, they like the organization, they're more engaged in their work. I mean, I read recently the Gallup poll where they talk about employee engagement is pretty much at the lowest it's been in 20 years. Couple that with also a Gallup poll that surveyed employees, 70% of employees say that they would be interested in changing jobs. So if I were a CHRO today, I wouldn't be able to sleep at night thinking that 70% of my people want to leave or are on the verge of leaving, right, are susceptible. So one of the things that generative AI is really good at is predicting weak spots in the organization, right? So that you can get ahead of an employee that's unhappy. You can get ahead of an employee that's at risk of leaving and address it. Because if you use the attrition cost calculator, right, for every person, this company, the $85,000 a year with the $275,000 productivity impact, every time they lost an employee, they lost $275,000 of revenue, right? How much does it cost them to replace the employee? It's the loss of revenue over the time that job is open. I did a project for a hospital. Their average attrition is about 27%, 26%. Their time to fill job is 81 days. We said if you can reduce the time to fill job from 81 days to 71 days, based on the 30,000 employees they had in this hospital, they would save $161 million in expense. Huge. So we need to think differently, right? So how can you best deploy this human asset that you have to create value? And you're right, the accounting gets a little tedious, but you also have to think about the human side of it. So any Daniel Pink fans in the room? So Daniel Pink did this research, and he found that employees are super, super creative and innovative when you give them time to think. So he profiles this Australian company that once a month gave all the employees a free day on Friday, that they could work on whatever they wanted to, with whoever they wanted to, for as long as they wanted to on that day. And those once a month Fridays generated like 30% product improvements because people could just think. So what do you do with that extra time? Do you let people think and be creative? And then how do you measure the impact on the organization? So you might lose some billable hours, but you might gain a new line of business, a new stream of revenue. And that's what happens in organizations, is that we try to control too much and we kill innovation.
I work in the aerospace industry, as I suspect, a lot of people here in the room do as well. And one of the things we see in the aerospace industry is that the pathway to promotion is oftentimes by leaving your current company to go to another company. Internal pathways to promotion are very difficult, in some cases maybe even impossible. Do you think AI can solve that problem?
Yes.
And if so, how?
So AI can deliver the critical information to make better decisions, but AI cannot change the culture of a company. So if the impediments for internal mobility is cultural, AI is not going to help that. AI will help managers understand where good candidates are within the organization to fill open jobs in their teams. And in fact, this year, I'm dedicating myself to strategic workforce planning. And I'm so tired of hearing companies say, it's taking me 90 days, right? 180 days to fill open internal positions when they've got the talent inside their own organization. And I think good companies that are using the right analytic tools, that have the right culture, because oftentimes bosses don't want their employees to leave them, right? So we need to create incentives for those managers to say, the manager gets a benefit, gets points when their people get promoted, right? Create an incentive for the management team to create mobility in the organization instead of saying, mine, you can't go, you belong to me, yeah? So technology and AI and data analytics can help you understand the competencies within your organization and create those career paths. But the management, the leaders, the managers have to have the right culture and openness for that. And the way, great example of this is Capital One. They actually create an incentive for managers to promote their people to other jobs. Because what they get in return is good people coming into their teams. Yeah, new thinking, new people, new competencies. So they've set it up as a win for everyone, the manager, the employee, the organization. So Gen AI is not going to help with your culture issue, but it will help identify the right candidates. And hopefully, if you create career paths for people, they don't jump ship to go someplace else. Yeah? Another question?
Hi. So it sounds like we're adding an additional responsibility to HR now, and that you're now going to be managing, essentially, or monitoring the ethical use of AI in business practices and analysis of business productivity. What tools does HR have in being able to monitor that kind of thing?
HR has AI to monitor behavior and performance. But HR has to be a partner with legal and with technology in this space. So one of the slides that I showed was the policy slide, and I gave you a hot link to an article that I wrote with the then head of the HR Institute at the Conference Board. And we wrote a paper called Questions the CHRO Should Ask About Generative AI. And it really is a policy document that highlights the kinds of questions, the areas of accountability, the risk mitigation areas, and who they need to partner with in the organization to manage that. So hopefully, are you in HR?
No.
Okay, so you don't have to worry about it. But you could download the article and give it to your HR person.
Worry about it as an employee. I should worry about it, right?
Yeah, as an employee, you should hope that the organization is thinking about the ethical and the governance issues around the use of AI. Yeah, that has nothing to do with HR. That has to do with governance. That has to do with leadership and leadership philosophy. So it's hopefully a good problem to have. Hi.
Been talking about AI and automating away the repetitive parts of jobs, but oftentimes that's where the co-ops and you get your first job is you get your feet wet in some of these repetitive things. Are we maybe cutting off our nose or doing deleterious things in the long run by automating away all of the repetitive tasks? Is it detrimental to our young co-op engineers and everything else?
I like that word, deleterious. Thank you. I think that you design jobs based on the needs for development, the needs for the organization. So if it's an entry-level job, you don't use so much generative AI in it. You let people learn the way that you think they need to learn through repetition, through tasks. And as you get higher, the jobs get more complex and higher and more cognitively laden in the organization. That's when you can augment.
But isn't that the desire, though, is to drive that productivity? And that is a way is to automate, to give it the tool. I mean, if we looked at our human capital statically, the way that we would maximize that is automate away, and you guys maintain increased productivity.
Yeah, and I'd rather augment a job that's costing me $500,000 a year than augment a job that's costing me $100,000 a year. Yeah, so we still need humans in the loop to make these kinds of judgment decisions. And, woe be the day when we let AI make judgment decisions for us. Right? Isn't that sort of like what the theme of the whole conference is there are certain roles that HR people, that managers in line functions need to maintain to make those judgment decisions. So you would make a judgment decision about what % of the job will get augmented. That's the human. That's the human in the loop. Thank you. It was a very good question. Hi.
Hi. So one of the issues that I've seen with my company is just how long it takes to hire people. So do you see AI helping with that, maybe with background checks and eliminating some of these?
Yes, absolutely. So if you look at the recruitment cycle, there's a whole process around it, and you can apply design thinking also to it. So actually, Stella and I in the book write about recruiting as a really important part of HR. And it starts with brand recognition, right? Candidates are not going to apply for a job for a company that's got a bad brand, especially a bad brand around how do they manage their people. So we need to raise awareness in the market about our brand and our brand value. And then every time we touch a candidate, we have to do it in a way that builds the brand. Right? I've had so many experiences, I'm old. I've had so many experiences where I've applied for jobs. I've been recommended for jobs, and I have been treated so rudely by the company that not only will I not work there, there's one company in particular, not only wouldn't I work there, right? I wouldn't recommend people work there, but I wouldn't recommend people use their product or their service. So you need ambassadors in the world to support your brand, and with social media, it spreads like wildfire. So anything that you can do, again, human in the loop. If you're a recruiter, I want you to spend time face-to-face with the candidates or in live interaction with the candidate. Let the AI do the analysis of the qualifications and competencies matching the job, right? Because that's what recruiters do. They look for fit. But if we let Gen AI or we let AI do that, then it leaves more time for the recruiter to actually interact with a human. And that builds the brand and the reputation. So along the way, you can look at any process and figure out what can be augmented, what a machine can do better than a human, that frees up the human to do the things that humans do better than machines.